Hello, I'm Morgana Evelyn, and I'm a little obsessed with honor mode. It solves my chaotic save scumming tendencies, and I keep coming back to it because it's really fun. But today, let's talk about builds. In November last year, I put together my honor mode party template as a companion document to my top 4 honor mode builds video. That PDF was around 20 pages at the time and was only intended to be a quick reference guide, but it got so much positive feedback from the community that it evolved beyond what I ever expected. I still get a lot of feedback and questions about the guide, so today I want to take a few minutes and explain some of the thought process and intention behind it, and maybe some of what I'm thinking for the future. With that being said, what guide am I even talking about? If you haven't seen it already, you can find a link in the description, pinned comment, and my link tree. It's a PDF quick reference guide for some of my favorite builds for party, duo, and solo honor mode. I made a point to include variations on almost every aspect of these builds because not all builds are worth making a video for, but I still want to make sure you have the framework to adapt them to your own needs. I spent a lot of time working with builds, and sometimes I would look online for inspiration or to better understand some of the technical and mechanical aspects of the game so I could push interactions even further. But I find it very difficult to read through huge blocks of text or to pay attention to longer videos just to get to the core information I need. I have attention issues, okay? I also don't have a lot of time. This was a real pain point for me, so during my honor mode builds video, I focused on the way the builds play and synergize together, and then stripped down and streamlined the level progression and mechanical aspects of the build for the PDF, which made it perfect to come back to as reference. I did say that the guide had evolved, and I knew I wanted to add several builds to patch 8, but everything ended up getting an overhaul, including updated overviews to give an idea of the build playstyle, the formatting, build variants, an updated introduction and contents page. So let's look at it, what's in here, and how do we use it. The introduction really explains the concept. This isn't supposed to be the only way to approach these classes. They are tested and extremely strong as presented here. But this guide is also intended as a framework, so you have a starting point for your own builds. I say it here in the introduction, but it bears repeating. Most builds are powerful in Act 3. At max level, with all the good gear, it's hard to be bad. To me, there's nothing worse than a build that feels weak for the majority of the game or needs a complete overhaul once you get into Act 3. The game's almost over by then. I like the builds that are fun early and don't feel like a slog, but we'll talk about that a bit more later. Each introduction is broken into an overview that talks about the key points of the build and generally the playstyle. If there's a build video available, it'll be linked here. Then straight in with stat allocation, origin, and skill proficiencies. Some builds include multiple stat allocation options, depending on whether you want to use elixirs or not, or whether you're playing solo or in a party. There are other options even beyond these, of course, so feel free to adjust these based on your needs. Then we go right into the level breakdown. I wanted to keep this easy to read at a glance, even on mobile or a second monitor. So every option here is easily identified by its own icon. Each icon also links back to the appropriate page in the BG3 wiki in case you need more information on where to find something, how it works, or want to check for any associated bugs. The goal was to create a portable pocket guide that works on any device. Then we go on to build variants. If I have any relevant short form content for these build variants, it's linked here. If I use any specific tech or interactions as a core feature of the build, like darkness or encrusted with frost, my stealth archer specifically has a pretty big mouse stump for late game bow comparisons. The point is to illustrate why I prefer the time string over any other, but it's also to give you the tools to make your own informed decisions. Thanks again to Mal, one of my Discord sweeties, for providing the maths. Then we move on to gear. Here we use the familiar character sheet, which makes it easier to see what you should be looking for at a glance, and again the gear icons are clickable and go back to the wiki, so you always have the information you need without overwhelming blocks of text. The gear sheets combine Act 1 and 2 because those acts by themselves don't have a ton of gear options. You'll generally find yourself going into Act 2 with empty gear slots or very subpar filler items, and those will be swapped out as you progress. Alternate gear is listed below in case you need options for a build variant or in the case of gear overlap with a party member. This can happen with certain generally useful items like the cloak of protection or risky ring, for example. Knowing what else is available is incredibly useful when preparing a build. Finally, items and consumables we can use for long rest buffs, and I don't really like using camp casters or very long buff routines, so this section line is extremely short and almost identical between builds. Honorable mentions follow the main builds. These are brief looks at some builds I've used and enjoyed, but they either don't need a lot of explanation or I don't use them often, but can vouch for their strengths. This is also a good time to bring up build selection. How do I decide what makes it into the guide and what doesn't? I have very specific criteria when I develop builds. Act 1 is the hardest part of honor mode, as you have limited resources and gear options, and you are extremely squishy. I always recommend avoiding combat until at least level 4, and that's roughly where I want my builds to start feeling impactful. Marshals are my preference, and they pop off at level 5 with extra attack. Waiting for level 6 pushes the limit of what I consider acceptable for an early game build, but there are a couple of builds that are worth the wait. Builds that come online in Act 3 and require all of the best gear options to be good just annoy me. They're fun for like the free fights that you get to use them, but I'd rather play something that starts fun and impactful and scales into the end game. I'm really sorry that the Abjuration Tank Wizard didn't make it into this goated list. It's just too far of a niche build for my preference, unfortunately. After all the important stuff, I'll list a brief word about me and how I got started with BG3 content creation. It's also the people I want to thank for their help and my support and further content links. I've commissioned several mods that are available to the community for free, just like this guide, and I hope that you'll check them out and have fun with them. With all that being said, you should never feel obligated to support me financially, as your time is the most valuable thing you can give me, and I thank you for it. At the end here are all my links for further viewing, which includes all my build guides and walkthroughs filled with lots of tips and tricks if you want to dive deeper into any of these builds and concepts. I included a changelog to keep track of updates because I do intend to keep this guide up to date for as long as it's relevant. I'm even happy to add new broken builds in the future if I do find any more that I like.